Hello, and it's time for the Raw review here on Wrestling with Regret. Before we get into that, though, in case you missed my announcement on social media on Monday evening, I'm happy to announce that later this month, you will feel and experience the pain of one of the worst wrestling movies of all time. And yes, I know we just saw Ultimate Deathmatch. I'm talking about the other one. On Friday, October 23rd, I'm hosting a live stream here on the channel where I will watch and riff just another romantic wrestling comedy with my special guests Colt Cabana and April Hunter, who starred in the film. It's happening at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. Sadly, we did not get to do this in Tampa like I had hoped during WrestleMania weekend, but who needs a theater when you've got webcams? So once again, it's happening Friday, October 23rd at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Mark your calendars. It's going to be quite the ride. Raw begins with Randy Orton in the dramatically lit Legends Lounge, where he talks about losing at Clash of Champions, being thrown into the ambulance by Drew McIntyre after getting beat up by him and all his Legend friends, who celebrated and laughed at his expense the following night on Raw, so he had to make them all pay. He talks about in very graphic detail the pleasure he took in beating up all four of the legends in the darkened room with his night vision goggles and everything, telling Christian to say hi to Edge for him and whatnot, kicking HBK in the skull, etc., etc. He says Drew still has to pay for what he did at Clash of Champions. He then challenges Drew to one more title match in Hell in a Cell later this month, and then when he gets done saying that, Drew barges in, they have a big brawl, the officials break it up, and Orton scampers off. We also find out later on the night that Drew will accept that match, so it's officially on. I mean, you could tell from last week and what happened with Orton beating up the Legends. You knew where that was going to go. It felt inevitable, so here's how we get from point A to point B. Pretty solid promo by Randy here. 6-woman tag team match up next. You've got Asuka, Mandy Rose, and Dana Brooke taking on Natalya, Lana, and Zelina Vega. Ladies look pretty good here. Zelina gets probably the most time to shine out of the heel team, really stretching Mandy Rose with a lot of creative submissions. Finally, Mandy tags at Asuka, and she's a house of fire. Mandy tags back in and hits the big flying knee to Lana in order to win the match. But Lana's not done suffering yet, because after the match, out come the tag team champions, Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler. They are back and medically cleared, and they beat up Natalya and Lana some more, complete with another Samoan drop by Nia to Lana through the announce table. That's like 3 in the last 4 weeks. Poor Lana. Man, what did she do to deserve that? Backstage, R-Truth with Little Jimmy discussing his mock draft choices, and the names on the whiteboard are the kind of kooky names you'd expect from someone like R-Truth to put on there. In the background, we see a mystery janitor sneaking up on him, and R-Truth sees him and goes, "Randy Orton?" Which got a big pop out of me. But no, because Truth falls and slips and falls on the water bucket. The janitor pins him to win the 24/7 championship, and it's Drew Gulak yet again. And he says, "See you next fall," a little supervillain line here as he runs off. And then we see later on in the night that Drew Goo is attacked by R-Truth, and Gulak trips and falls into a trash can. It falls over, and out pops Akira Tozawa. The timing of that and the placement of where everyone was, and you see Akira just kind of pull himself out of the trash can after that beat, after it gets knocked over. I thought that was some great timing. Gulak and Tozawa go, "You," at each other. Then all three of them a big fight in this big trash bin. You can't see what goes on here, but ultimately Truth emerges once again the 24/7 champion. I'm not even mad about that, because I really enjoyed these segments tonight. Sometimes with me, the 24/7 title segments, they work or they don't, and there's really no in between for me. But I feel that this week, I think the timing and the way the jokes just kind of connected, to me, it was a positive. One of the few bright spots for Raw this week for me. Backstage, you got Mustafa Ali with Ricochet and Apollo Crews having a chat when MVP walks in and makes a one-night-only offer to any of those guys. There's one spot open in the Hurt Business. Who's going to take it? And they're like, get out of here. No one likes you. But then when MVP and the other guys leave, you see Ricochet kind of thinking about it for a second. And then we go to our next match as Seth Rollins and Murphy take on Humberto Carrillo and Dominic Mysterio. I'm getting really sick of this combination here. Before the match, though, we see Murphy telling Seth on the microphone that if he still wants to be his disciple, Seth should apologize, not to him, but to Aaliyah Mysterio. And Seth he's flabbergasted by that. He's very upset by Murphy making that request, and he says, "I could have done worse. I could have shown her other DMs that were in that phone about how she hates her family and whatnot," but they're interrupted by Dominic and Humberto. The match begins. More tension and bickering between Seth and Murphy as the match goes on, and Seth keeps saying, "I don't need you." It almost costs him the match, though, but Murphy is able to hit Carrillo with a flying knee when Humberto's in the sky to win the matchup, and so for his team, and then he storms off and leaves Seth in the dust. And we'll see more about them and what happens to that storyline as the night goes on. Backstage, Adam Pearce is approached by Braun Strowman, who, for the record, is still a SmackDown guy, but there's just no Raw Underground tonight for the second week in a row. What happened to Raw Underground? Where's Shane McMahon? Where's Jordan Amagbien guarding the door? We gotta know answers to this. So anyway, Braun wants a fight, and Pearce says, well, you're not a Raw guy, so we can't really have you in a match, but we'll give you an exhibition against anyone. We'll just find somebody for you. So Strowman leaves. Keith Lee walks in on the shot and says he wants a shot at Braun Strowman. And all I could think about this, again, what the hell is the point of the draft if Raw and SmackDown guys can just show up on the different shows and there's no problem with that? And like, we have this brand-to-brand invitational thing. We've already kind of blown through 3 of them in this year so far. And we have that. Strowman just shows up, Dana Brooke just shows up, and there's no explanation for this. And there's a draft happening this Friday. What's happening? What's the point? Elsewhere backstage, Seth Rollins accosts Murphy for what happened in that tag team match, and he gives Murphy until 10 p.m. to apologize to him being Seth. We move on to the KO show in the ring, and Kevin talks about what happened on SmackDown this past Friday when he got mandible clawed by the Fiend, Bray Wyatt. He just talks about how the claw kind of paralyzed him and how the Fiend changes you. That's the kind of theme they're going with him, and he kind of echoes that sentiment here. He questions out loud, what other dark characters or conflicted, tormented souls going to attack me? We had Aleister Black, we had Bray Wyatt. Who's next? The Brood? Kevin calls Bray to the ring, but instead we get the Funhouse Bray on the big screen in the Firefly Funhouse. He calls Kevin his new friend. He wants to celebrate by singing a terrible song about friends. KO wants none of that, and he says he can't be brainwashed like Alexa Bliss was. Bray gets all serious, and you hear the spooky music, and he says that, Kevin has no idea what he's getting involved in by meddling with the Fiend, and he'll learn more about that this Friday on SmackDown. The Funhouse video ends, and Kevin basically says, well, since you didn't come out here, I'm going to go to the back and look for you to fight you. As he's making his way up the ramp, though, Aleister Black jumps him once again, hits the Black Mass to knock Kevin out, and that's that. Again, this angle between Kevin and Aleister, still nowhere near completion yet, and now we've got this kind of overlapping thing with KO and Bray Wyatt. I mean, the possibilities, a lot of people were kind of speculating months ago, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Aleister and the Fiend were working together? And I don't know how many people are still thinking about that. Clearly, there's still possibility for that based on what we're seeing on Raw and SmackDown, but really, who's to say what's going to happen at this point? That'd be interesting if we see, the Fiend adding Alexa Bliss, adding Aleister Black, maybe another person like that. They seem to be big on stables all of a sudden, so I wouldn't be surprised if we got that, but that's total speculation. Let's wait and see, I guess. On we go to the exhibition match with Braun Strowman and Keith Lee, where they say because it's an exhibition match, it won't count toward either man's win-loss record, which matters not one bit because it ends in a double count-out within like a minute. Why even bother then? Strowman checks Lee into the barricade, and they break that. Lee shrugs it off pretty quickly, and the two of them fight up the ramp into the set, and then they fly off the stage into a big padded box, and that's where it ends there. It's a cool big boy bash, but I'm just sick of what they're doing with Keith Lee at this point. I think Sean Ross Sapp said something like he's had like 8 matches so far on Raw or on the main roster. 5 of them have ended in a DQ or a double count-out bullshit finish. Can we not have Lee just win like 2 matches or even have 2 matches that go to a finish conclusively without any kind of bullshit booking? That's not a great way to build him up. Shelton Benjamin and Bobby Lashley take on Ricochet and Apollo Crews. Before the match begins, MVP on the mic issues kind of a warning to Retribution saying that the Hurt Business is what nightmares are made of. Out come Apollo and Rico and Ali, who are all kind of talking trash about the Hurt Business. Ricochet teases he might be joining the Hurt Business, but he's like, psych, I don't want to join. You guys are lame. MVP issues a threat, and then Ricochet says, you guys have beat me up before. I haven't backed up. I haven't backed down then. I won't back down now. This match begins, and I really just cannot be bothered. I'm so sick and tired of this feud going on into perpetuity, it feels like. Really couldn't be bothered with this. It's funny because even before the match begins, MVP specifically says, let's take our anger out on Ricochet. Let's beat him up more and teach him a lesson. He's not even involved in the finish. It's Lashley putting the full Nelson on Apollo Crews yet again. And then the ultimate insult is the babyfaces are on the outside of the ring, and Ricochet goes, we're not going to give up. We're not going to back down. We're going to keep coming for you. And Shelton Benjamin in the ring laughs in his face over that. Jesus Christ, if that's not the end of this angle, I don't know what is. Please end it. 12 minutes and 40 seconds until the deadline to apologize. Backstage, Murphy sees Aaliyah Mysterio and apologizes to her, but Aaliyah says, this is not your fault, but you need to worry about Seth. And are you really going to apologize to him? And Murphy says he's still not sure about that. Elsewhere backstage, Mustafa Ali approaches the Hurt Business and says, for his match with MVP, to bring both your guys, I'm going to go alone, and, I'm going to beat up all 3 of you guys. And now we're back in the ring, and Seth Rollins wants Murphy to apologize. Murphy is very hesitant to say anything, and Seth gets more and more frustrated and yells at Murphy to apologize, grabs him by the beard and tells him to apologize. Finally, Murphy can stand no more. He and Rollins have a big old scrap, and Rollins at one point grabs a kendo stick, but Murphy intercepts it, thwacks Seth a whole bunch of times, and tells him to apologize to Aaliyah. Seth finally begs him off and apologizes to Murphy, to Aaliyah, to everybody, says he didn't mean to bring her into this. And finally, when his guard is down, Rollins lunges at Murphy and gouges his eyes with his thumbs, beats him up with a kendo stick till it breaks. He grabs a steel chair. Out comes Aaliyah to protect Murphy from a further beating. And finally, out come the rest of the Mysterio family. Seth runs off. And then Dominic keeps going back and forth and telling his sister to both keep going and to stop as they're going back up the ramp and trying to figure out like what's gotten into Aaliyah and all this stuff. And we see Seth looking on the monitor, looking very gleeful as, ooh, the plan's all coming together. You know, I said what I said last week about the whole Murphy-Aaliyah storyline. My opinion on that has not really changed that much. What we saw this week didn't really do anything to confirm or deny my suspicions and fears about that storyline, but we are seeing some kind of development here because we see Murphy, he is breaking away, it seems, from Seth. This could be an elaborate ruse and Murphy could come back into the fold. There's clearly some kind of plan, some kind of scheme at play here. You know, how much of this is a setup? Who's in on what at this point? You know, they're still leading me on here. They haven't totally breached the crossed the line into uncomfortable territory, so just to wait and see where it goes. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler defend the women's tag titles against the Riot Squad. This match is supposed to happen at Clash of Champions 2 weeks ago, but Nia and Shayna were pulled from the show at the last minute, so here we are. The match is fairly short, but I think it tells a pretty good story still. Ruby takes a lot of punishment here. Her selling is just on point as Shayna keeps stomping and like putting all these holds, these painful looking holds, onto her arm. Finally, she tags out to Liv. Liv and Ruby do a lot of quick tags for a bit in their short-lived comeback, but Shayna snuffs it out pretty quickly, hits the Kirifu with a clutch, gets that locked in, and Ruby, I should say, taps out. So the champions retain. Like I said, pretty short match, but I liked the action in it. It was very, it was very well paced, I think. Good work by Ruby and Liv, especially. I would like to see more competitive matches with these two now that they're back together. The Street Profits are backstage cutting a promo. In reference to their partner for the evening, Drew McIntyre, they make a timely Braveheart reference because it's the one Scottish thing that Vince McMahon knows about besides Roddy Piper. He's not even Scottish. The Profits put over the Legends who got beat up by Randy Orton last week. They say they want the smoke, and then Drew McIntyre comes into the shot and says he just wants to beat people up. On we go to Mustafa Ali versus MVP. Hey, that rhymed, diddly dee. Early in the match, you've got the other members of the Hurt Business getting in the ring and cornering Ali. Suddenly the lights flicker, Retribution appear, and they surround the ring. And suddenly at this moment here where Ali is kind of like back to back with the Hurt Business, ready to fight the Retribution guys, suddenly Ali leaves the ring, gets in the face of T-Bar and Mace, and suddenly he turns around and shows that he is with them. Not only that, he is the leader of them. He's sixth Retribution on the Hurt Business. It's a big gang beatdown, and Retribution stand tall with Ali in the ring with them. And that was certainly a swerve I did not see coming, where this former cop who's made it his mission to change the perception of Muslim Americans in wrestling, joining this stable, which is very clearly inspired by some people's depictions of BLM and Antifa. Don't think I don't know what you guys are doing here. It's incredibly transparent. That being said, I don't know how to feel about this, in terms of the overall storyline. I would say it's an improvement over the last time we saw Retribution a couple weeks ago, where they were fighting with the Hurt Business and like they were face and heel and back and forth in one night. Kind of got the same treatment tonight with the Hurt Business as well. At least we're kind of over the silliness of the name reveals like we had from 2 weeks ago. That was, I think, threw everyone off. But I think, it does maybe answer more questions. We're left with like less questions than we were before with Retribution. Maybe they're going to tie in the fact that there was the rumor that Ali was the hacker on SmackDown we saw for a long time, and that vanished. Maybe it'll tie into the fact that Ali was kind of the person in line to get that Kofi Kingston push last year until he got hurt and then kind of cast aside when he came back. So maybe they're going to incorporate that as well as his kind of revenge, his retribution against WWE. I mean, there's different ways they can kind of bring this back into some kind of coherent story, but I mean, the optics are just kind of weird to me. In your main event, the champions, Drew McIntyre and the Street Profits take on Randy Orton, Dolph Ziggler, and I believe this week his name is still Robert Roode. This match, it is what it is in terms of quality. It's very, almost kind of paint by numbers, six-man tag format we're so used to seeing in the company. Near the end, in the hot tag, Dawkins tries to go for an anointment on Ziggler, but he counters into a DDT. It does not look good. In the end, Ziggler with a famous Sir to Montez Ford. Drew hits both Ziggler and Rude with the Claymore, but he walks right into an RKO by Randy Orton, who pins him and beats him to win the match, which is a really big deal because I think the last time that Drew's actually lost by pinfall in a match was August of last year against Ricochet. Yeah, that Ricochet, and see where their careers have gone since then. But it's crazy to me. I'm not even mad that Drew lost here. It had to happen eventually, but that's an insane record of how well Drew's been protected since he came back from the King of the Ring tournament. That's absolutely mind-boggling to me, especially in an era we live in where they kind of believe the way to build baby faces is to have them lose and lose and lose, kind of the Daniel Bryan method, even though it only worked one time with him and no one else, but have Drew be so dominant and so well received like he was before there were the lack of crowds and everything. I think that it's a real big testament and shows a lot of restraint and patience to go that long before we actually get Drew pinned clean by somebody. That's amazing. So it gives Orton a big leg up in the build for their match of Hell in a Cell. Hopefully things will gear up more in a positive direction with that angle. I'm going to give this week's Raw a straight up C grade, just right down the middle for me. There wasn't too much in this show that was too dumb or insulting or uninteresting. I think the biggest takeaway from this week's show was Ali joining Retribution, and even though I have some questions about it and still kind of waiting where it's going to go long term, I think on the whole that moment was a positive for me, which is why I put it in the pros. And besides that, the biggest takeaway for me was just the funny shtick with Gulak and Tozawa and R-Truth. And yeah, the women's tag title match is kind of a hidden gem. It wasn't a spectacular match, but the story they told in that short amount of time, I think did really well. I was kind of hopeful they'd have more time as if it was a pay-per-view, but not so much this time around. Yeah, the show was just, it had its moments, but there was also a kind of repetition. We've seen the Hurt Business versus Apollo and Friends a million times, and again, they're kind of compromising the draft before it even begins, with wrestlers going from show to show with really no consequence. But let me know what you thought about Raw this week in the comments section below. A quick programming note: there will not be a Wednesday Warfare this week. I will be out of town on vacation, and I don't want to work too much if I can help it, but there will still be my Halloween Havoc 95 review on Wednesday night, and of course, I'll be back in time for the SmackDown review on Friday, and that, of course, is live right here on the YouTube channel. But until then, I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.